My name is Nayaswami Hriman. I've been serving for nearly 30 years at the Ananda in Seattle, Greater Washington area with my wife Padma. And our topic today is meditation tools for upliftment. Yesterday, Padma and I met with our old friends. They're both old friends and old friends. Prem Shanti and Om Prakash, who at different times in their lives served in Seattle for a number of years. And Prem Shanti gained the reputation for, it took her some years, she reported, but she came up with a phrase by which she could respond to the fertile brain of her husband and his unceasing flow of ideas. She would say to him, "Om Prakash, some of your ideas are better than others." You know, our beliefs, as Master would put it, won't save us. And we have all the ideas we need, don't we? There's not one global problem or one personal problem that there isn't a solution for. As Yogananda is well often quoted, there are no obstacles, only opportunities. What we need is something of a greater idea, the greater idea of who we are and where we've come from and where we're going to. And so in our meditation teacher training in Seattle, we give out, we have two pieces of advice. One is the great mantra that Swami Kriyananda taught us. It's 3 words: I don't know. Because meditation teachers, when they're new, are probably in the greatest fear of being asked questions about esoteric matters of the chakras and this kind of thing. And the other counsel we like to give is, don't forget to meditate when you teach a class. You know, it's easier to talk than to meditate. And to talk about meditation is easier than to actually meditate. In the years where Swami Kriyananda would do all the classes for Spiritual Renewal Week, he would always give a class on how to meditate. And sort of by contrast to the talking versus meditating, his talks were so inspirational and so full of interesting tidbits of one sort or another that the talk was itself the motivation to meditate. But meditation's actually not that complicated. So in an hour-and-a-half talk or longer, he maybe would get to watching the breath in the last 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. It isn't that complicated. But yet, we resist. The soul loves to meditate, but the other guy, the ego that's been talked about this week, seems to have a resistance to it. You know, we can huff and puff and pranayama our way through our meditation practices, and then when we get to what we call in our training the 3rd stage of meditation, which is when we drop all the activity and try to enter the state of being, sometimes that's a little short. And we're encouraged, of course, to deepen that. It's the hardest part of meditation, because the techniques themselves aren't that complicated. And yet we do resist. In my training, maybe hundreds of students over nearly 30 years, occasionally a student would say, in respect to a description of the 3 stages of meditation, "Oh, I just love sitting in the silence." But, you know, you have to be careful about that, because what it felt to me is what they loved was being me and just being themselves. And so much of meditation that is taught out there, you know, when Swami Kriyananda, 30 years after The Art and Science of Raja Yoga, which is an incredible book. I mean, I taught it for decades, and now Murli Venkatrao has taken over that. And all of us who have taught from it, I mean, there are sentences in that book that you could meditate on. One of them, I'm not going to talk about it, but I've meditated on, so to speak, is his definition of Kundalini. He said, Kundalini is the entrenched vitality of our mortal delusion. Because you see, in my meditation teacher training and when Padma does her spiritual counseling, you know, there's a lot of books over there that have picked up the mystique of Kundalini and made a big thing about it. But as Master said, every time we have a kind thought, Kundalini stirs and awakens. It's not that complicated. But as we also say in our training, you have to want to meditate. And that's an important point because it gets to the motivation. You know, when Master described, I think in Los Angeles, perhaps it was Davy, made this quote, which I often have done myself, when he had an experience in cosmic consciousness, he came out of it saying, I cognize the center of the Empyrean as a point of intuitive perception in my own heart. And in the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, Swamiji says that the divine self resides here, the ego here, the enlightened ego here. And so our practice of meditation is to transcend all, yogas chitta vritti nirod, is to transcend all movement. And yet, as Krishna says, you cannot achieve that actionless state without taking action. You know, in our path, you know, all the elements of practice are there, but I've found it helpful in my motivation and my understanding of meditation to see the self-realization techniques, Kriya and so forth, as a form of karma yoga. Of course, we need devotion. Of course, we need right understanding and intention. Yes, of course. But you know, in 1975, when I visited Tiruvannamalai to Ramana Maharshi's ashram, which Murli and I visited again just 2 years ago, I was quite taken in my early stages before the autobiography. I read Paul Brunton's book, A Search in Secret India, and I was quite taken by what is sometimes called the path of Jnana Yoga, what he called the practice of self-inquiry. But you know, Ramana Maharshi didn't give any techniques. And in my own experience, and Swami Kriyananda would say that Jnana Yoga is really a practice or a state for advanced spiritual souls. And if you ever sit there and ask, who am I don't know about you, but it really doesn't take you very deep or very far. And it's the energy, it's the prana. I love that song by Swami Sri Yukteswar. Let pranayam be thy religion. Pranayam will give thee salvation. Our path is a path of pranayam. Lahiri, I don't know that Lahiri used this term but necessarily, but I've heard it in the context of his commentaries and his diary, that another way of calling what we do could be prana-karma, because we move the energy like an energization, but in truth, the energy moves us. You see, the chakras and the astral form, I mean, just like your liver or your spleen, what's it doing right now? You don't have any idea how your digestion is working. We're just a small fraction of what is true. Reality is infinite, and that's kind of big. And so to reach that state where you can actually, with courage, open up to that which is so much greater than ourselves, does take courage. And when Swami wrote that book, Awaken to Superconsciousness, 30 years after Art and Science, which text we use for our meditation teacher training, it's like he took it a step further. And he called it Awaken to Superconsciousness. You know, I don't know, maybe someone here does, whether Yoganandaji coined that term. He may not have coined the term superconsciousness, but he might as well have. It's an excellent term. But what that book symbolizes or offers to those who read it is that meditation is something far greater than just our own thoughts, which is how much of meditation is taught these days. I participated many years ago with a combination of other churches, and we wanted to do a peace meditation in downtown Seattle. And I had to convince them in the public meditations to have a little silence. It's not the norm. Okay? And I love mindfulness if it brings people into greater awareness of their subconscious impulses. That's wonderful. It can be very enlightening on that level. But it's still just a fraction of the truth that will make us free. And we've been so blessed with that understanding, but to get there is not easy. To get there takes a lot of courage. And that resistance that we find to meditation, this is why it took me years to discover. I used to teach meditation in the early years, and I think, well, they already bought the class and they're here to meditate. Why would they need a talk on the benefits of meditation or anything motivational, right? Well, hey, every one of us, every day, needs to remind ourselves why we want to meditate. And so the why of things is actually very, very important. And as I say, you have to want transcendence, not just to huff and puff, not just to have a lovely visualization, not just to learn more about yourself, watch those silly thoughts that you're not going to remember 2 seconds afterwards. We actually have to want to be still and know. You know, Swami pointed out over the time, I don't know that it's in print anywhere, but something that was meaningful to me, given my own temperament. He said that the key to the monkey mind isn't the mind, it's the heart. And that's why we pray and why we chant. But also he gave a wonderful visualization in that Awaken book. It's be a spiritual archaeologist. And I use it often because, you know, most of the time, I mean, nowadays everyone talks about anxiety and everyone's busy, busy, busy. The business of America is busyness. How are you doing? Are you busy? I mean, who cares? I mean, is it difficult to be busy in this culture? I don't think so. And so it says, be a spiritual archaeologist. And dive deep. I think his reference was his experience in Capernaum in the Holy Land. He said, I dive down to the layers of culture into the living presence of Christ. And he used that experience to give this guided visualization, to drill deep down, step by step, past the outer layers of anxiety, of fears, of desires, you know, the junk, the stuff, and go down. And to do that at the beginning of your meditation, in addition to a prayer, and if you chant, in addition to a chant. Because you're bringing the prana, you're bringing the energy of yourself in. Bring it in through the door of the heart. I think that's one reason, at least I'm going to say it's one reason, that Swami would always chant, door of my heart. Because when we open the door of the heart, when we're content, when we're at rest, when we're at peace, the monkey mind says, cool, I'm with you. It just sort of settles down. That's the key. You know, the other thing is, we've been talking, a few of us in Seattle, I don't know why these topics arise, but, you know, Swami has made statements over the years that he didn't really have a lot of inner experiences and seeing portions of the spiritual eye. Well, you know, there's a story of Ramakrishna that Ramakrishna, he said, I'm holding the keys of God realization from you to his great disciple, Swami Vivekananda, so that I can squeeze a lot of work out of you, and then you get it. And I think what some of the things Master said to Swami, your life will be a life of service, and then he paused, and meditation, and other things that he said, including you'll find God at the end of life, and death will be your final sacrifice. And Swami would sometimes say, what sacrifice is that? But anyway, I think something very similar was in Swamiji's life. He had a lot of work to do. He was the most accessible, most prolific, most giving direct disciple, bar none. And however diffident he was about relating his inner experiences, number one, that tells us we should do the same, okay? Because I've taught a lot of meditation classes and Raja and all those things. You know, people like to talk about those things. I understand that, but they don't really mean that much, okay? If they had a meaning, they'd have told you. They're signposts to help us concentrate. Patanjali says any of these astral perceptions are simply there to focus your mind, and then by degrees to absorb, and then by degrees to transcend them completely. Okay? They're just like meditation techniques, nothing special. And yet, when I look back over Swamiji's life, he radiated all the 8 aspects of superconsciousness. It was his life dharma to serve and to give. And you know, the 8 aspects align more or less comfortably with the chakras. So the low coming up from the bottom piece emanating through the Muladhara chakra. Well, Swami would sometimes say, peace is my bottom line. Meaning he would not do or say or feel anything that would disturb his inner peace. Wisdom. I mean, look at all the books he wrote, thousands of lectures. And the books that I think many of us treasure the greatest, his magnum opus of the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, his autobiography, The New Path, Promise of Immortality. Wisdom, he had wisdom for breakfast, as he might have said. Vitality, energy. My Lord, he was at death's door more than the cat, more than 9 times. He had tremendous energy. He said, I feel like I'm sitting on a volcano. Acceptance, love, devotion. You know, in the early years, his devotion was a little bit held in. Not a lot, but a little bit. But as the years went on, it was unrestrained. Calmness, my goodness, under intense persecution, intense all sorts of things, he radiated goodwill and connection, deep calmness. And at the end of his life, in the final years, he was like an overflowing chalice of bliss. That leaves us the last 2, which are generally considered internal, light and sound. Ever listen to his voice? If that wasn't the voice of Om, his music, 400 pieces of music, his chants, even his photos radiate light through the eyes especially. He radiated. He was a crystal clear prism, a crystal of superconsciousness. And his dharma was to radiate that. And to say that he didn't experience it is foolishness. He was it. He didn't have to emphasize it. He didn't have to pursue it. He was it. You know, ideas, we have plenty of ideas. In my own relation with him, ideas were sort of, you know, for some reason I often found myself driving his car. In the early years, he would drive the car and I'd sit there, but one time when he was driving, he was playing this beautiful album, which I love and I recommend for those of you who want to learn the harmonium, Kriyananda Chants Yogananda. And on that album is, Will That Day Come to Me? And on the album itself, he barely can continue. He went so deep into it. So we're listening to this album, and what did I say at the end of the album? I came up with this deep thought. I said, Swamiji, you forgot the line, 1,000 Vedas do declare. He just looked at me and just didn't say a word. Then one time I asked him, well, you know, if you need a guru to become realized, how did the first guru ever get realized? You should have seen the look. You know, when I read the autobiography the first time, I didn't really think consciously about this, but I just had this feeling that Yogananda was Jesus Christ. It was an unexamined feeling. And so one time we were together and I asked Swami, I mean, he said other things years later, but long ago, well, you know, Master had visions of Jesus Christ, right? So I'm thinking to myself about what I had felt when I first read the autobiography years before that. So he couldn't have been Jesus Christ, right? He said, oh, heavens, no. You can call out from the ether. In infinity, past, present, and future exist simultaneously. So no, that's by no means definitive. One time he was writing, I think it was his Revelations of Christ, because he commonly would send out drafts of his chapters on books to a group of us. And One time he did a reading on, it's a beautiful story. It's very short in St. John's Gospel, chapter 9. It's the story of the blind man along the road and, you know, oh, Master, why is this man born blind? Because of his parents or whatever. And it was an opportunity, one of several that Jesus had, to remark on, reject, or accept reincarnation, which he's managed once again to sidestep. So we were emailing back and forth on that chapter, and I don't recall exactly, but I took exception to something, or at least had a different point of view to whatever Swami had written. And we went back and forth and ended up in a stalemate. So on his next visit to Seattle, we're sitting there in the car, and this time I'm driving and he's sitting. And so because it was unresolved, I knew I needed to do something. So I said, well, I guess I was kind of a pill, huh, sir? And he said, yes, you were kind of a pill. And so, okay. And, you know, it really doesn't matter because Master left a lot of things unsaid. You know, he said the human body was, he confirmed the Genesis in saying that the human body was caused by the direct action of God. But he never explained why. And Jesus also, when these great avatars come, and Swami too, he would give us the techniques. He didn't really say a whole lot about it. Nowadays we say a lot, you know, and people seem to need that, and it's perfectly fine. I guess it's our job to explore these things. But nonetheless, when you get right down to it, we have to understand that our mind asks these questions, and it's perfectly fine. But don't stop there. That's really my point. You know, Hong Sa gives to us the point of concentration at the spiritual eye, like Yondev talked about. You know, there's some very interesting aspects about how the brain works. Again, things are being discovered. I think energization someday will be subjected to scientific studies and will be proven to be the exercise of the future, as in fact Master said it would be. No need for dumbbells, you know. And so there is a lot yet to be done on the path. And when, you know, Swamiji was told that his life's work to lecture and write, and he said to Master, well, haven't you written everything? Well, Master was shocked that he would even say such a thing. So we do have a great work to do in the exploration of the science of meditation. But in that exploration, sometimes I fear we're going to forget to meditate, because it's so much more interesting to talk about it. Here I am talking about it. But with Hong Sa and Om, a slow starter, a big finisher, Swamiji would say, I find that has been true of all the techniques. It's all about tuning into energy, first controlling it, and then realizing that we don't control it, and then letting it go. The process is not complicated. But you have to actually want it. You have to actually want to transcend your own thoughts, your own fears and desires, your own little personality. And over the years, you begin to realize how superficial and useless are our opinions. My friend Nayaswami Jamuna once long ago, many, many decades ago, I remember her saying that you're not really on the spiritual path till you decide your opinions are not worth that much. And I would add also to that the thoughts. So let's go deep in the inner space of God realization. Thank you.